First, the water shifts, then silence. A shudder moves through the hull, and from the deep where the sunlight cannot reach, something vast begins to rise. A shadowy tangle of limbs and teeth and huge, all-seeing eyes. The Kraken, the Leviathan, Scylla and Charybdis, Umibozu. The sea monster goes by many names, but it always inspires dread, horror, awe. It is always very, very big, and as an archetypal beast, its meaning is equally mammoth. My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a therapist turned author and co-creator of the Betwixt app. And this video is for anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed by thoughts or emotions too big to name or too terrifying to face. Anyone who's ever wondered about what really goes on below the surface. Accounts of sea monsters are found in virtually all cultures with a connection to the sea. Their presence in the waters of human imagination, in other words, seems pretty much inevitable. In myth, this common archetypal symbol tends to represent primal, chaotic forces in the world's creation, or the embodiment of the unknown, unpredictable, mysterious, and dangerous. Examples of sea monsters include the Leviathan, a large sea serpent or whale-like creature from Jewish mythology, often associated with chaos and destruction. In Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis were fearsome sea monsters guarding the Strait of Messina. Scylla, with 6 heads and 12 feet, resides on a cliff, while Charybdis, often depicted as a monster whirlpool, lurked opposite her. Umibozu from Japanese folklore is often described as a giant, shadowy, human-like being that rises from the sea to capsize ships, particularly those of sailors who disrespect it. And of course there's the Kraken, a massive squid-like creature from Norse mythology, also known for attacking ships. So their forms vary, some tentacled, some humanoid, some serpentine. But they all share one important thing. They rise from below, from the unseen, the unknown, the uncontrollable. In Jungian psychology, the archetype of the ocean, sea, or any dark water represents the unconscious mind and the shadow. Sea monsters, then, represent the fears, urges, memories, and truths we've thrown overboard, but which still stir below the surface. No matter how much we'd like to delete or slay our most painful, uncomfortable, or unpalatable thoughts and feelings, it's not possible to exterminate an aspect of the self. Instead, within the mysterious and terrible soup of those unconscious waters, resisted parts of the self mutate into monsters. Sea monsters are the ultimate symbol of what we fear will consume us. They are the panic attack that comes without warning, the grief we thought we'd buried that surfaces in other ways, the shame that casts a menacing shadow wherever we go, the unmet need that devours and devours, forever attempting to find a fulfillment that it cannot reach. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus must sail between Scylla, the many-headed devourer, and Charybdis, the whirlpool that swallows everything. To survive the journey, he has to reckon with both monsters, not to defeat them, but to navigate between them. He chooses to sail closer to Scylla, who devours 6 of his men, rather than risk losing the entire ship to Charybdis' whirlpool. So as opposed to the more obvious and, in my opinion, less helpful and less interesting proposition of direct victory over the monsters, Odysseus' encounter speaks of the impossible choices and inevitable sacrifices inherent in any epic journey. As such, the story serves as the perfect metaphor for what it means to move through the inner chaos we must willingly walk or sail into when we go through a challenging experience, or when processing pain or trauma in therapy, for example. On journeys like these, things will be lost. Old beliefs about the self or the world, coping mechanisms, habits, dreams, versions of self. And while it may feel like obliteration looms, with courage, caution, and conscious decision-making, we don't need to be consumed when we make these passages. Often, sea monsters are depicted as female. This is not a universal truth. The Kraken was androgynous, not assigned any gender, and although Umibozu was said to take the form of beautiful women to lure sailors to their death, the monster is usually described as male. However, both Scylla and Charybdis are portrayed as female. And particularly in earlier Jewish texts, such as the Book of Enoch, the Leviathan is described as a female sea monster. Lesser monsters of the sea also tend towards femininity. Mermaids, sirens, and the Nereids, or sea nymphs, were all originally female. The prominence in myth of dangerous female sea monsters, and other female monsters really, may reflect social anxieties about feminine power and sexuality. Within a patriarchal world such as ours, femininity is de facto forced into the collective shadow. And feminine forces, emotion, intuition, chaos, and creation, are cast in a monstrous light. What's more, for a patriarchal structure to sustain itself and remain unchanged, That rejected femininity must stay beneath the surface, lest it rise up and take the system down, pillar by pillar. Historically then, sea monsters may have served as warnings about the potential dangers of female influence or transgression. Stacks up. Take the Siren's deadly song, for example. As Nina Triaradou argues in this article, the Siren's danger lies in their having a voice, contrary to patriarchal gender conventions. Their ability to sing literally causes death, thus encapsulating the male, i.e. patriarchal, fear of allowing women to speak in public. Around the time of those myths' first tellings, women were not meant to tell their stories, and so instead stories were told about the importance of silencing them. However, the femininity of sea monsters is also connected to the fact that the ocean herself is usually coded as feminine. The sea is a cruel mistress and all that. Traditionally, water is a feminine archetypal force, along with the moon, soil, and caves, as opposed to the masculine symbols of the sun, fire, sky, and mountains. Equally, darkness, emotion, intuition, the unconscious, and chaos are all feminine, as opposed to their masculine counterparts of light, logic, reason, the conscious mind, and order. Again, because we live in a world that venerates the masculine side of all those polarities, the deep feminine does sound like a scary proposition. And it is, but it's also the home of transformation, connection, and relatedness, as opposed to the masculine focus on stability, individuation, and separation. Ultimately, we need both forces. If we allow the feminine to stay in the shadow, if we continue turning away from our emotions, intuition, and our quieter needs for self-reflection, mystery, even chaos, then we are inviting the Leviathan, Scylla, and Charybdis into our worlds, along with other watery beasts like the Kraken or the Kraken, if you've read the Dungeon Crawler Carl books, which was a reference I greatly enjoyed, and one that paints a brilliantly modern picture of everything I've just been talking about. Patriarchal values encourage us to be the constant hero, to strive for outer strength and success and the shiny achievements that result from slaying weakness, vanquishing enemies, and just doing. But we can't stay in that mode indefinitely. As with pretty much everything, balance is key. Just as the tide advances and withdraws in an endless cycle, a life of wholeness and growth will also oscillate between feminine and masculine energies. Periods of individuation and self-assertion are followed by periods of integration, reflection, and connection, and so on. So we all need to take a deep breath and face our sea monsters at some point. If we insist on sailing smooth, shallow waters, living only at the surface, those monsters will catch us off guard. But if we dare to look down, to meet the beasts below with curiosity instead of fear, that's when things can change. Over the course of this series, we're going to meet monsters of all kinds, not just those that live underwater. Medusa, the vampire, the witch, the dragon, the shadow beast, ghosts, werewolves, zombies, and the chimera. Each has its own lore, its own wisdom, and its own challenge to take on. Here at the very beginning of this journey, it's the sea monsters challenge that we must face. Are we willing to wade into the water? Are we willing to brave a look into the depths? If it feels safe to do so, take a breath and imagine that you're standing at the edge of the world. A cliff overlooking the midnight ocean. Salt air fills your lungs. You can hear the crash of waves breaking far below. The moon hangs huge in the air, its silver light turning the water to mercury. Somewhere in the distance, something moves beneath the surface, and you don't need to see it to know it's vast. But you step forward anyway, and begin to descend, down the crumbling path that leads to the rocks, slick with seawater. Then, as you kneel at the boundary between the land and sea, the waves still, the water becoming a black mirror. And as you look into that mirror, you find a face staring back. It's yours at first, but then it shifts, becoming strange suddenly, older, wilder, eyes gleaming with wisdom, with grief, with power, truth, and everything you've ever rejected too, everything you've ever tried to forget or swallow. Looking deep into those eyes, though, I wonder if you feel not repulsion or even fear, but something else. Something with more promise, more purpose. I wonder if you can feel that this monster is not separate from you, never was, and never needed to be either. Not really. So you breathe and you do the only thing you can. You let it rise. Let it speak. And you listen to the song it sings. Now, I can't tell you what you might hear within that melody if you listen long enough. Whether you'll remember who you were before those parts of you were silenced, before the storm, before the forgetting. Whether you'll hear a plea, or a warning, or a cry of strength. Or whether for you something different will surface. But no matter what it offers, I can tell you that your mission is not to banish the monster. None of us is on that path. Instead, our quest is to welcome it home. So as you pause there by the water's edge for just a moment longer, face to face with this dark being, I'd like to ask if you can sense this simple thing, that the work has already begun. I'll leave you with that. And I hope to see you for the next episode of this series, where we're going to be meeting the Queen of Rage herself, Medusa.